In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples today. Welcome to Totally Lit, the podcast celebrating reading, writing and creating literature. I'm your host, Ky Garvey. Thank you for listening. Paula McLean, welcome to Totally Lit.
It's an absolute pleasure, Ky. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm a bit starstruck because you are such a big presence in the Australian literary community. It's a pleasure to have you here. Now, you are having your very first book come out. Would you like to share a little bit about that with me?
Sure. Well, look, it's not my first book, but it is, in fact, my first novel. Yeah, so I'm very much a debut novelist and absolutely thrilled to be published, as all debut writers are. And the story behind all of that is that Baker's Lane Books, with its imprint called Fearless Press, is in fact owned by my daughter. And Ginny Grant had been in publishing for over 20 years in various roles and eventually as a senior editor, and wanted the opportunity to move into publishing. But she also wanted to be able to support emerging writers, debut novelists, and women in particular through her Fearless Press imprint. So Baker's Lane itself publishes fiction, nonfiction, memoir, etc. But Fearless Press she has reserved for debut women writers. And in addition to that, she also decided to begin a prize. So the Fearless Prize, presently, it's about to be judged by both Ginny Grant and the wonderful writer Emily Bitto. And I think at the moment they're waiting for the last of the submissions to come in for the prize. You have to be an unpublished debut novelist for this prize. So the Stella Prize, for which I've had a long association, publishes, of course, books that are already published, and their publishers submit those books. But Ginny saw so many talented writers trying to get published in mainstream publishing houses, and saw this as a wonderful opportunity for them to submit their manuscripts. So we're all quite excited to see what comes of this prize and what novel it is that Ginny and Emily Bitto end up choosing for this inaugural prize.
What an amazing opportunity. And now it's a $10,000 contract, isn't it? A publishing contract.
That's right, against the royalties. Yeah.
That's very exciting. I think, any opportunity to submit and have your work read is amazing, but then to have the opportunity for it to be published as well is incredible. Do you want to tell me a little bit about why you're so passionate about supporting literature and that these opportunities for women are so close to your heart?
Look, Ky, I think that in the whole arts space, in particular in philanthropy, donors are very attracted to the arts, but typically they're attracted to the ballet, to the symphonies, to the art galleries, etc. But relatively few people give to literature. And I think there's this idea that writers like to sit in a garret earning nothing and writing their heart out until they're finally published. And we all know that few novelists make more than $14,000, $15,000 a year. So to me, I could see this as an area of need. But beyond all of that, I had been a former fiction editor myself in New York a very long time ago now. And
got a little thrill then when you said publishing in New York. Oh.
And of course, I'm a passionate reader. I've been a bookworm my entire life. So when I had the opportunity to join the Stella board, it was an absolute joy for me. And I had quite a few years, almost from the beginning, working with Stella. And of course, the Stella Prize is a most successful and wonderful prize in this country. In many ways, it transformed how women's writing was perceived in this country, in particular in the media. And it began, very much with a group of women writers and publishers in Melbourne in 2012 who began to get more and more concerned about, in particular, the Miles Franklin Prize, which over many years had, in fact, not selected women as the prize winners. And it got to the point where one year the entire shortlist were male writers. And rather than complain about it, they decided, in fact, to start this wonderful prize and called it the Stella Prize, which many people would know, but perhaps not all of your listeners. Stella is, in fact, Miles Franklin's Christian name. So thus the cheeky choice of the Stella Prize. But it's been a wonderful association, and I've watched over this past decade women's fiction in particular, and some of women's nonfiction as well, starting to win major prizes, and also being reviewed in our journals, our newspapers, etc., and given much more placement than previously. So it's been a wonderful thing to watch, over the past 10, 12 years now.
It is interesting as well, because I think at the moment, the majority of things being published seem to be women writers, and yet the prizes are being won by men. So well done for promoting literature for women. I think it's a challenge, though, for women to write, because most of us have to wait until the right time in our life to be able to write.
Indeed.
So there can be those challenges that you find where you're trying to look after your family, look after your relationship, trying to find that time to squeeze in some writing. And then, there's times where some women are waiting till retirement to be able to actually follow their creative dreams. So opportunities where you can enter prizes and sometimes give yourself some space, or give yourself, like, how do you get known in the writing community if you don't even have time? I actually have a little prize attached to the Totally Lit podcast. It's a little writing competition that I ran last year, and it's running again this year. And part of that prize has a little scholarship for carers, because I'm also a carer of two boys on the spectrum. But I've been lucky enough to win some writing prizes myself, and so I've wanted to share that with other people as well. So nowhere near as big as your prizes, but just a little competition.
Yeah, look, I think there can't be enough prizes. There are thousands of people apply for these prizes, and of course, there's only ever one winner. The nice story about Stella is that right from the very beginning, we wanted to not just award the major prize, but also to award prizes to the 5 runner-ups. And it's, so at least you then get, 6 writers each year out of just that one prize who are getting some recognition.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But of course, you have to be in a position to be able to raise those funds.
Yes, and that's no mean feat, is it?
Not at all, not at all. And, I've watched Stella all these years and have helped in those fundraising campaigns. So I know how difficult it is to raise those funds. But it's lovely to see so many new prizes emerging, and each one choosing a slightly different genre, a slightly different take on what a writer might need, and, including your own. So well done.
Now, you mentioned that Ginny is your daughter. Do you think that she was inspired by the work you've done in philanthropy to create her own prize?
I don't think so much that. I think certainly with her Fearless Prize, she watched her mother all those years at Stella. I also began a nature writing prize in 2011 for Australian writers. So she's watched that as well. But in many ways, Ginny, I think, was responding to a need in the publishing industry. So many of the small independent publishers have folded or have been consumed into the major international publishing houses. And at the end of the day, they, of course, are looking for books that are going to sell large numbers. And we're seeing a shrinking of the kinds of genres that those major publishing houses are pursuing. They tend to be really popular genres at the moment, like crime. Sexy romance is a very new, big area that's doing well for the major publishing houses. Memoir, but especially memoir by very famous people.
Yes.
Which are going to sell. So, and meanwhile, Ginny, was seeing so many manuscripts come in that were really worthy, that were exciting pieces of writing. And it's just very, very difficult to find a publishing house that's going to support many of them. So she was really responding to that need and her own passion to be able to have her own small independent publishing press where she could choose some of those books. So it's just been an absolute delight to be her first title. Also to work with your daughter professionally. We don't often have those opportunities. And it's just an joy every day to work with her on this.
Oh, that sounds lovely. I used to work with my mum, except we worked in a bank together, so definitely not quite the same. Now, speaking of memoir, we haven't spoken about your book at all yet. So initially you were going to write it as a memoir, but then it became fictionalized. Is that correct? Am I on the right track there?
The story behind that story is that when I left the Stella board, I found that I'd come to a point in my life where I really did have some time to pursue my own writing dreams. And I had, over the years written the odd short story. I never showed them to anyone, made no attempt to submit them. But I loved just occasionally going off into that world of fiction. But I originally sat down to write memoir, and I was thinking, not a book, I was thinking much more like an essay perhaps that I could submit to one of the journals. But I sat down to do it, and in fact, I didn't really enjoy it. I could see that you're confronted with all kinds of issues in writing your own story. Issues of privacy, issues of who are you going to feature? What stories are you going to tell? What stories perhaps shouldn't you tell? And in sitting there that couple of days, imagining writing memoir, I thought, no, you really want to write fiction. This is what you've always wanted to do. And so I decided to do that. And then deciding what kind of novel I might write, I wanted to work with a character whose world I could understand. And for me, that was going to be a writer. So I thought, well, perhaps I could have a writer write her own memoir. And therefore, it would be written in the first person, in her voice. And I wanted to tell a story of a life, what that might look like. And in many ways, I'm beginning to think of it more and more as an every woman story. Not that everything that happens in my novel would happen to every woman, but elements of it are really every woman's story. And so that's what I set out to do. And I thought, well, if I'm going to write a fictitious memoir of a writer, I need to talk about the books that she's published. So off to the side on a flip chart, I came up with 5 novels, the titles of 5 novels, and 1 collection of short stories. Initially, they were just titles on my flip chart. But as I proceeded through the story of Hilary Mason's life, when I would come to a point at which she would be publishing, I would bring in one of those so-called novels and give it a few themes. And then I thought it was really important to try to relate those particular themes in her novels to Hilary's own life, because I really do believe, even as fiction writers, we are in some ways writing our own lives. Those imaginative moments that we think about what we're writing, when we think about what a person might say, when we think about how deeply someone might feel something in a novel, we're really drawing upon our own life experiences. And so I thought it was important for Hilary to discover that, for her to find out, much later in life, that the novel she had been writing all along, in fact, she was exploring many of the issues she was either dealing with or not dealing with. And so that was really interesting structure to work within. It became books within books in some ways. And I really enjoyed that creative structure. It of course, had its difficulties and all of that, but I enjoyed the problem-solving part of it.
Did you have any novels or authors that you wanted to emulate? Like, were there any books that you thought, I would really love to be able to put out a book that is like someone else?
Well, look, there's so many writers that I admire, but you have to find your own voice. And for me, this was Hilary's voice, and it very quickly became Hilary. I followed her. I took her lead at every step. And I used to hear about novelists all through the Stella years and before, talking about, my character wrote the book, and I just followed along. And I didn't anticipate that's what I would feel, but I did. You sort of spend, 3, 4, 5 years with this character in your head. You're walking around with them all the time, and you see aspects of their personality all around you, and you're drawing on all of that. So I lived with Hilary very intensely for 4 years, and it was really hard to give her up at the end.
That
And
was what I was about to ask, is how did you disconnect when it was time to say,
well,
it's done?
it just took, several weeks. Once I knew I was going to be published, I started to think about her again. And in particular, in this rather wild ride that you go on once you're published, I started to really live with Hilary again. And even in preparing for podcasts, for radio interviews, for the 3 launches that I'm having, I've returned to Hilary's headspace a lot. So she's back with me at the moment.
Like having an old friend come back to visit. It's great. Now, if you were to give some advice to an aspiring author that would like to release a novel, do you have any advice for them, for my listeners?
Well, look, I think I'm not probably the best person to ask, having only written one novel, but I think I would say, writers are driven to write, and you just have to stick with it and not give up. I think it's terribly important to keep going. Of course, you will have many drafts. Of course, you will have, bad days, days where you begin to doubt yourself. But just push through, keep going, and trust that, one day you're going to finish. And then you begin the whole process of finding a publisher. First of all, finding, if you can, a literary agent, which is obviously would be very helpful. But it's becoming difficult to find literary agents as well. So it's not easy. There's, of course, the whole self-publishing route, and that is getting a little bit better. Distribution remains the big issue for them. But nonetheless, that whole self-publishing industry is going to get better and better as more and more players, come into the market and find, ways to support writers. But in the world of publishing houses, you just have to keep trying. And it's very hard to get a rejection letter, no matter
I got a
how nicely
rejection
they're written.
today.
And you just have to keep pushing through.
Yeah.
And, there are some, new small publishing houses coming onto the market, of which, of course, Baker's Lane is one. And contact them. You never know what they're looking for and whether your novel might be perfect for their list at that point of time.
I am intrigued that you mentioned that you had been writing over the years, but you hadn't submitted or shared before. Was there anything holding you back from submitting, or has now just been the right time to be sharing your work?
Look, I think it was perhaps a lack of confidence in my own writing ability, and through that time. And these were just quick little stories that I would write, and then
Mm.
that was the end of them. So I wasn't really trying to follow through. And I've had a very busy life,
Yes.
obviously, and so it probably wasn't the right time.
Mm.
But now, having enjoyed so much of these 4 years of writing and now being published, I do wish I'd started earlier and made that time earlier. But you do what you do when you can.
Mm.
And I've loved every minute of this journey. In particular, I've loved going into that creative space, and I can sit for hours and forget to stand up because I really do get so immersed
You're in
in
the zone.
in the zone. Yeah. And I've loved that.
And when you had decided you're writing your novel, was there anyone that you shared your work with as you were going through the process, or did you wait till you had completed the novel and then shared it?
I think, having been an editor, and I think any editor who does write fiction is their own worst enemy, because I was constantly revising.
Mm.
And but that worked for me. And I got it to a point where I would have called it a pretty good shot at a rough draft. I did show it to a professional reader at that point and got some terrific advice. And then I really waited until I had finished.
Mhm.
And again, I had an opportunity to show it to a professional, and we took it from there. I felt, I'm ready now. I'm ready to see if someone would like to publish this. And but even today, I had to reread a particular part of my novel recently in preparation for a question that I knew I was going to be asked at an interview. And oh, I could have said that better. But of course, it's too late. It's not. It's now in print, and it was my very best attempt at being a debut novelist. And I have
Fantastic.
to be happy with that.
And when you submitted to Baker's Lane, what was that process like? Was it, I guess, the same kind of interaction as you've had in the past when you're editing and working with other writers, or is it a different feeling working with your daughter on your novel?
Oh, Kai, it was really hard to send this manuscript to Ginny. I have 2 daughters and a son, and I hadn't shown any of them what I was doing. I had read small segments to my husband, but he hadn't. I hadn't given him the whole manuscript to read either. It's partly that whole family thing, that you don't want to put your children or your husband in the awkward position, perhaps, of not liking your novel. And and of course, I would have known in a nanosecond if they didn't like it, just by the look on their face and the words they would have chosen. So it was very hard to send it to Ginny, and I did, and waited nervously, and she called me the next morning and said, "I could not stop reading your book,
Oh, fantastic.
and I want to publish this book." And then she told me about how she wanted to have an imprint called Fearless Press. And of course, I'm a feminist, and I absolutely loved the whole idea of being published under an imprint called Fearless Press.
That is amazing. It's a very good name. Well, I'm glad that she loved your work and that she wanted to publish it, because that would have been terrible if she hadn't liked it. There have been some awkward conversation around the dinner table if there were edits going back and forth and a bit of a battle over what to keep in and what to throw out. That's
But also she's a professional, and I think, if she hadn't liked segments of the book, and I could have worked with that,
yes.
because also being an editor, you do respect professional advice, and also being an editor, I am very, very happy to cut. I can really delete very easily. I don't go, oh no, I can't delete that part. I love that part. If it's not working, I'm happy to delete it. But that wasn't the case, and it's just been it's been a joy.
It's interesting as creatives how when we create a piece of work, it's important to us that the people we love the work we've created. Because if, like, I really wanted my dad to really love my picture book, but I would not send a piece of my work in my day job to my dad. Like, there's definitely a disconnect in that. I'm like, oh, Dad, I really want you to like this email I wrote at work today. Yet with my writing, I'd really value my family and my husband's input, and I want them to love it. So it's interesting how this part of us sort of manifests in us, I guess, that we want the people we love to love it as well.
Oh, I think it's a very natural and very deep feeling, that those we love really respect what we've done and see the value in it, and want to be supportive.
Now, I have another question for you, which I have not run past you at all, I'm sorry. But do you have something about yourself that is surprising that you would like to share with our listeners that they may not know about you?
Do you mean in terms of my own life story?
If you're happy to share.
Look, I think I had a wonderful early publishing career in New York, and I was a young fiction editor for a magazine called Ladies' Home Journal, which at that time was really one of the most well-read, large women's magazines in the country. But it also, at that time, published some of our best writers in the country. And often they were short stories, or they were novels that we condensed, or they were novels where we took an extract. And that was really very, very exciting time for me to do that. And I guess probably the story that I've told the most about that time is that Mary Hemingway released Ernest Hemingway's unfinished novel, Islands in the Stream. And of course, Hemingway was long dead, and she was managing the estate. And Ernest had put this manuscript in a bottom drawer. He himself knew it wasn't good enough. In fact, it hadn't been completed. But the estate decided there was value in releasing it. And they released it to 5 magazines in New York that published fiction. And they were sent to the 5 magazines, each with a chauffeur and a limousine. And the chauffeur driver arrived at Ladies' Home Journal, and I was the first young editor to read it.
Oh, wow.
We had only, I believe, something like 24 hours or 48 hours to make a decision as to whether we would bid to take an extract from the book. And you can imagine, for this young editor in New York, this was an absolutely thrilling experience.
Yes.
And in fact, I couldn't see that there was an extract that we could use in Ladies' Home Journal that was right for our audience. And the senior fiction editor couldn't either. So we didn't make a bid.
You declined. Oh.
And 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 in fact, in hindsight, we couldn't have afforded it. It was snapped up by Esquire magazine, and who paid at that time a phenomenal amount of money for it. So no, we didn't. But
That is exciting, though, to have your
very,
hands
very,
on that.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Was there any female authors in that time that you helped uncover?
Yes, I think probably the most famous one was Zelda Scott Fitzgerald.
Oh, wow.
And she had written, I believe she'd written one novel that had been published, but she left a lot of short stories that hadn't been published ever. And I used to meet the literary agents, and one day one of the literary agents said, "I want to offer you the chance to publish one or two short stories of Zelda Scott Fitzgerald." And of course, I was again absolutely thrilled at this opportunity. And we snapped those up. They were wonderful, wonderful short stories. And of course, I was an emerging feminist at that time. And we all know the story of poor Zelda, who'd been so much under the thumb of Scott
Mm.
Fitzgerald, and that she, in fact, had helped him to write a lot of his work, but had never ever been recognized for that. So that was wonderful.
And now, at this time in your career, you're continuing to support women and promote female literature. Amazing.
No, it's something I feel quite passionate about, and I've had opportunities to do that as well.
Really is a bit of a legacy, isn't it, what you've been creating? It must be interesting to look back at it. Is it a little bit surprising at times?
No, no, look, I can see the thread. I mean, the thread really began as a young bookworm,
Mm.
and then, working as a fiction editor at Ladies' Home Journal, this was all about the voice of women, and and then I had other opportunities through my life to find different ways to support the voice of women. I belong to a wonderful group of women writers in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, where I live half my time. And it's called the Wingecarribee Women Writers. And our mission is, in fact, to support the voice of women, in particular, the voice of women lost to the Southern Highlands area.
Mm.
So it's with me all the time.
It
And
does sound like that. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Now, you've got some launches coming up. Are those happening across the country or just in New South Wales?
so there was one, the big one was at Glebe Books last week, and the wonderful moderator, Carolyn Baum, launched the book for me there with a lovely in conversation, and it was so exciting because we filled Glebe Books on the night, which was
Oh, that
terrific.
would have been wonderful.
And then we flew down to Melbourne, where we had a small Melbourne event, which was different and lovely again. And then next week in the Southern Highlands, I have another quite large launch because I know a lot of people in the Southern Highlands, and in particular, a very big writing community. So I'm looking forward to that. And then, Ky, we start on the whole events at libraries around the country and writers' festivals. So we'll see where we go with that.
To keep my eye out, and I'm based in Brisbane, so I'll keep my eye out. If you're coming up this way, I'll try to get to an event. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Paula. It's been wonderful to hear about your career and about Baker's Lane and the Fearless Prize and Stella. There's so many things you're bringing to the community. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you very much. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Totally Lit is an independent podcast. You can help support us to continue to chat with wonderful Australian creatives by leaving a review on iTunes or sharing our socials with your friends. You can also make a contribution at www.buymeacoffee.com/totallylit. This will also help with equipment and podcasting platform fees. I love to interact with our listeners, so feel free to say hello either by email or social media at totallylitpodcast@gmail.com, or you can find me on Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn and Twitter, and now Blue Sky. I've also created a group on Facebook called the Totally Lit Writing Community. It's a space to continue the conversation and share your writing successes, events, launches and latest projects. Jump into the group and say hello. Thank you for listening to Totally Lit, and don't forget to go out into the world to read, write, create, ignite.